Step out of the vehicle, now. The flashlight beam cut through the windshield like a blade. Behind it, a face carved from institutional contempt. Badge glinting, hand already moving toward hip. The man inside the silver Honda Accord didn't move fast enough. I said, now. The door wrenched open from outside. Hands grabbed fabric, pulled. Cornelius Odom, 68 years old, stumbled onto the asphalt of Route 123 at 9:52 p.m. on a Saturday night in March. His right leg buckled, it always did now, 3 years post-stroke, and he went down on one knee. The officer standing over him saw what he expected to see, an old black man who couldn't stand straight, who couldn't form words fast enough, who must be drunk or high or both. What he didn't see was the medical card in the wallet, the card that explained everything, the card that would have prevented what came next. What he definitely didn't see was who this man used to be, who he'd trained, what phone calls he could make. Sergeant Garrett Fenwick had just pulled over the man who'd spent 34 years teaching America's intelligence community how to analyze threats. He'd chosen the wrong target, and he had no idea. Can't even stand up straight. Fenwick's voice carried the bored cruelty of someone who'd done this before. Who'd do it again. Definitely DUI. Neil Odom tried to speak. His mouth opened. The words formed in his mind, clear, precise, legally accurate. But between brain and tongue, the stroke had built a wall. The sounds came out slow, halting, broken into fragments that sounded nothing like the sharp intelligence behind them. I have a med... Save it. Fenwick grabbed Neil's arm, yanked him upright. You can explain to the judge. The medical card stayed in the wallet. The wallet stayed in the car. And Cornelius Odom, who had trained 3 CIA directors, 2 NSA directors, and half the senior analytical staff at Langley, was shoved face first against the hood of his own vehicle. The metal was still warm from the engine. His cheek pressed into it, and the systematic destruction of his dignity began. If you've ever been judged before you could explain yourself, this story is for you. Like and subscribe, because what happens next will change how you see the badge forever. 72 hours earlier, the townhouse on Bellflower Court in Burke, Virginia, looked like it belonged to someone who'd spent a lifetime making order from chaos. Every object had a position. Keys hung on the third hook from the left, always the third. Medications lined the kitchen counter in 7 daily compartments, each labeled in careful handwriting. A whiteboard mounted by the refrigerator displayed the week's schedule in military precision, times, locations, contact numbers for emergencies. Neil Odom stood at his kitchen window at 6 a.m., watching the sunrise paint the suburban rooftops in shades of amber. He held a small notebook, spiral-bound, well-worn, filled with observations written in a tight, disciplined script. He wrote the date, the time, the temperature displayed on the outdoor thermometer, the fact that the Henderson's newspaper had been delivered at 5:47, 6 minutes earlier than usual. Details. Always details. The stroke had taken his fluent speech. It had taken the easy confidence of walking without thinking about each step. But it hadn't taken his mind, hadn't touched the part of him that noticed everything, recorded everything, analyzed patterns that other people missed. Old habits, his brother called it. Marcus didn't know the half of it. The phone rang. Neil answered, pressed speaker because holding the phone to his ear while writing was inefficient. You still writing everything down like the world's gonna end? Marcus's voice filled the kitchen, warm with decades of fraternal affection and gentle mockery. Neil smiled, tapped a response into the text-to-speech app on his phone. The synthetic voice replied for him. Old habits. Old habits, Marcus snorted. You retired 8 years ago, Neil. Whatever secrets you were keeping, they don't matter anymore. If only that were true. How you feeling? Loretta said you had some dizziness last week. Neil typed. The phone spoke. Fine now. Doctor adjusted medication. Good. Good. A pause. You coming to Sunday dinner? Loretta's making those collard greens you like. Neil typed. Yes. 7 p.m. 7 p.m. Marcus chuckled. Not 7-ish. Not around 7 p.m. exactly. 34 years they had you, and you still can't just say, "See you Sunday," like a normal person. The synthetic voice replied, "Normal is inefficient." Marcus laughed outright at that. "Man, I love you. See you Sunday, 7 p.m. exactly." The call ended. Neil made a note of the time, 6:14 a.m., and the substance of the conversation. Not because it mattered, because the act of recording kept his mind sharp, kept the synapses firing, kept him who he was, even when his voice no longer cooperated. He finished his morning coffee at 6:32, rinsed the mug, placed it on the drying rack at the precise angle that allowed maximum airflow. Then he retrieved his jacket from the closet, third from the left, and stepped outside for his morning walk, 6:35 a.m., same as every day. Burke was quiet at this hour. The commuters hadn't yet begun their exodus toward the Pentagon, the Capitol, the anonymous office buildings in Tyson's Corner that housed more secrets than most people could imagine. Neil walked the same route he'd walked for 15 years, since moving here after his wife passed, since deciding that proximity to the world he'd left behind was better than exile from it entirely. 2 miles, 43 minutes. 312 houses he'd memorized the layouts of, not because he'd tried, but because his brain simply collected. At the corner of Bellflower and Oak Ridge, he passed a familiar figure, Walter Keene, 72, walking his aging golden retriever with the careful pace of a man whose knees had filed multiple complaints over the years. "Neil," Walter raised a hand. "Good to see you out." Neil nodded, raised his own hand in greeting. Walter fell into step beside him, matching the slower pace without comment. They'd known each other for 7 years now, lived on the same block, shared the same morning routine, shared other things too, though neither had ever spoken of them directly. "Beautiful morning," Walter said. "You still doing your walks at 0600?" Neil nodded again. "Thought so." Walter smiled. "Some things don't change." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Walter didn't try to fill the space with chatter, didn't ask questions that required lengthy answers. Understood, in the way that only certain people could understand, that Neil's silence wasn't unfriendliness. It was economy. "Heard there's a new restaurant opening on Main Street," Walter said eventually. "Italian place. Supposed to be good." Neil made a mental note. Italian, Main Street. Potential outing. "We should go sometime. You, me, Loretta, and Marcus. Make an evening of it." Neil typed on his phone. The synthetic voice said, "I would like that." "Good." Walter patted Neil's shoulder. "I'll set it up. Maybe next month, once the crowds die down." They parted at the corner of Oak Ridge and Maple, Walter heading east toward the park, Neil continuing his loop around the neighborhood, recording, observing, maintaining the habits that had kept him alive through 3 decades in a world where noticing the wrong detail could get you killed, and missing the right detail definitely would. The first sign of trouble came at the CVS pharmacy on Main Street. Neil stood at the pickup counter, waiting for the prescription Dr. Sharma had called in 2 days earlier. Blood thinners, standard medication for stroke survivors. He'd been taking them for 3 years without incident. The pharmacist, young, harried, visibly annoyed at the length of the line behind Neil, drummed her fingers on the counter. "Name?" Neil opened his mouth, formed the sounds carefully. Cornelius Odom." The pharmacist's eyes narrowed. Her nostrils flared slightly, a micro-expression Neil catalogued automatically. Disgust, suspicion, judgment rendered in approximately 0.3 seconds. "Sir, have you been drinking?" Her voice dropped to a stage whisper that somehow carried to everyone in line. "It's 10 a.m. Neil felt the heat rise in his face. Not embarrassment. He'd moved past embarrassment years ago. Frustration. The endless, grinding frustration of being trapped in a body that no longer translated his thoughts with the efficiency he demanded of himself. He reached into his pocket, retrieved his wallet, extracted the medical card, and placed it on the counter with deliberate calm. The pharmacist read it. Her face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: confusion, understanding, embarrassment, and finally a thin mask of professional neutrality that didn't quite hide the irritation at being proven wrong. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize." Neil nodded. Acceptance without absolution. She retrieved his medication, scanned it, processed the payment with mechanical efficiency. When she handed him the bag, her eyes didn't quite meet his. "Have a nice day." He walked out without responding. There was nothing to say that his voice could adequately convey, and the text-to-speech app felt too impersonal for the precise blend of dignity and disappointment he wanted to express. This was life now. Daily negotiations with a world that saw his halting speech and assumed diminished capacity. That heard the pauses between words and filled them with their own prejudices. Most people apologized once they understood. Most people adjusted. But the damage was always done in those first few seconds. The flash of judgment, the assumption of deficit, the small cruelty of being dismissed before you could explain. Neil had learned to tolerate it, had learned that correction was more effective than confrontation, had learned that the energy spent on anger was better invested in documentation. So he documented. Wrote in his notebook, 10:17 a.m., CVS Main Street, Pharmacy Tech, female, early 20s, name tag read Jessica, assumed intoxication based on speech pattern, corrected with medical card, no escalation. Not every slight deserved a formal complaint, but every slight deserved a record, because patterns emerged from records, and patterns, properly analyzed, could change systems. The HOA meeting that evening provided another data point. The Burke Crossing Homeowners Association met monthly in the community center, a low-slung building that smelled of industrial cleaner and decades of contentious debates over fence heights and parking regulations. Neil attended religiously, not because he cared about fence heights, but because the woman who ran the meetings was also Fairfax County Councilwoman Pamela Sternwood, and Councilwoman Sternwood sat on the Public Safety Committee that oversaw police department budgets. She stood at the front of the room now, immaculate in a cream-colored blazer, leading the discussion with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent 20 years turning small-scale politics into personal fiefdom. "Item 7, Sternwood announced. The proposed increase in landscaping maintenance fees. Discussion?" Neil raised his hand. Sternwood's eyes found him. Her smile remained fixed, but something flickered beneath it. She'd seen him at these meetings before, had heard him struggle to speak, had, Neil suspected, already dismissed whatever he had to say before he said it. "Mr. Odom, the floor is yours." Neil stood, opened his mouth. The words formed. Questions about the contractor selection process, concerns about transparency in bid evaluation, a comparison to fees in neighboring communities that suggested Burke Crossing was being significantly overcharged. What came out was, the fee increase, the contractor. "I want to know why." Sternwood's expression shifted into performative patience. "Mr. Odom, we don't have all day. Perhaps you could just write it down?" Neil felt the room's attention like weight on his shoulders. The other homeowners shifting in their seats. A few sympathetic faces, more than a few that simply looked impatient. He'd come prepared for this, had known it would happen. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, the full analysis, typed and printed, complete with citations and comparative data, and handed it to the attendee in the seat beside him, who passed it forward. Sternwood glanced at the paper, scanned it with the speed of someone who had no intention of actually reading it. "Thank you, Mr. Odom. Your concerns are noted." She set the paper aside without further comment. "Moving on to item 8. Excuse me?" A voice from the back, Walter Keene standing with his hand raised. "I'd like to hear more about what Mr. Odom's analysis shows. The numbers look significant." Sternwood's smile didn't waver, but her eyes cooled by several degrees. "Mr. Keene, we have a full agenda tonight. Mr. Odom's written comments will be included in the meeting minutes." "But not discussed?" "Time constraints." Sternwood turned back to the room at large. "Item 8. The proposal to restrict on-street parking during snow removal." Neil sat down. Made note of the interaction. Sternwood, dismissive. Walter, supportive. The paper, set aside without acknowledgement. Time, 7:23 p.m. Data point recorded. After the meeting, Walter caught up with him in the parking lot. That was frustrating to watch. Walter fell into step beside Neil. She didn't even read your analysis. Neil typed on his phone. The synthetic voice replied. She read the conclusion, decided it was inconvenient. Politics. Walter spat the word like a profanity. Same everywhere. The ones with power decide who gets heard. Neil nodded. This was a truth he'd learned long before Burke Crossing, long before retirement, long before his voice became a casualty of blood vessels that had decided, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, to fail. You want to ride home? Walter asked. It's getting cold. Neil typed. I'll walk, thank you. Suit yourself. Walter patted his shoulder again, a gesture of solidarity that required no words. See you tomorrow morning, 0600. Neil watched him go. Then began his walk home, his breath misting in the March evening air, his notebook ready in his pocket for whatever observations the night might offer. He didn't know yet that Saturday would change everything. Didn't know that in approximately 62 hours, he would encounter someone who wouldn't accept a written explanation, someone who would interpret his silence as defiance, someone whose assumptions about a slow-speaking black man on a dark road would trigger a cascade of events that would ultimately reach the highest levels of the American intelligence community. He simply walked home, made his observations, prepared for Sunday dinner at 7 p.m. exactly. Because routine was safety, documentation was power, and Cornelius Odom had survived 34 years in a world of shadows by trusting both. Sunday dinner unfolded with the warm predictability of family ritual. Loretta's collard greens were, as always, worth the trip. Marcus talked about his grandchildren. Loretta's daughter, Janine, complained about her commute. Neil listened, nodded, occasionally typed responses that the phone spoke for him. Uncle Neil. Janine leaned across the table, her voice carrying the careful enunciation people used when they thought he might not understand. How are you feeling? Neil typed. The same as last week. Still smart, still slow. Janine blinked, uncertain whether to laugh. He's messing with you, honey. Loretta refilled Neil's water glass. Neil's mind as sharp as ever. It's just his mouth that got the memo late. Loretta. Marcus shook his head. Don't joke about it. Who's joking? He'd say the same thing if he could talk faster. Loretta winked at Neil. Isn't that right? Neil typed, She's not wrong. The table relaxed. Conversation flowed around him like water around a stone, not excluding him, but not requiring his constant participation either. This was how family worked now. They'd adjusted, learned to include him without demanding the kind of verbal engagement that exhausted him. He observed, made mental notes. Janine's new watch, expensive, probably a gift from the boyfriend Marcus didn't approve of. Marcus's slight wince when he reached for the salt, his back was bothering him again. Loretta's careful monitoring of how much wine Marcus poured, she was worried about his blood pressure, though she'd never say so directly. Patterns. Always patterns. After dinner, Marcus walked him to the car. Drive safe, Neil. Marcus gripped his shoulder. Call when you get home. Neil typed, Always do. I know. Marcus smiled. But I'm your big brother. Worrying is my job. The drive home was quiet. Route 123 stretched through the darkness, familiar and unremarkable. Neil kept both hands on the wheel, maintained the speed limit precisely, signaled every lane change with 3 seconds of advance warning. He didn't notice the patrol car fall in behind him at the intersection of Route 123 and Braddock Road. Didn't notice it match his speed, maintain distance, follow turn for turn. Not until the lights started flashing. 9:51 p.m. Neil pulled to the shoulder with practiced calm. He'd been pulled over exactly 4 times in the past decade, twice for malfunctioning taillights, once for an expired registration, once because an officer claimed he'd been swerving on a night when Neil's blood alcohol had been 0.00. He knew the procedure. Interior light on, hands visible on the steering wheel. No sudden movements. Wait for the officer to approach. The protocol that every black man in America learns, whether anyone teaches it or not. The patrol car's door opened. Boots on asphalt. Flashlight beam sweeping the interior of Neil's Honda. License and registration. Neil moved slowly. Left hand to the sun visor. Registration and insurance card in the clip where he always kept them. Right hand to his back pocket. Wallet. He extracted the driver's license with deliberate care, placed both documents in his extended hand. The officer took them, examined them with the flashlight. Sergeant Garrett Fenwick. Neil read the name tag automatically, committed it to memory. White male, mid-40s, approximately 6 feet tall, heavy-set but solid. Expression suggesting boredom overlaid with suspicion. Cornelius Odom. Fenwick pronounced it like an accusation. You know why I pulled you over? Neil opened his mouth. The words were there. No, sir, I don't. Could you tell me? But the execution was slow. The sounds fragmented. No, sir, I don't. Your taillight's out. Fenwick cut him off before he could finish. You been drinking tonight, Mr. Odom? Neil shook his head, reached carefully for his wallet again. What are you doing? Keep your hands where I can see them. I have a medical... I asked if you've been drinking. Fenwick's voice hardened. Yes or no? Neil shook his head again, tried to form the word. No. Then why can't you talk straight? Fenwick leaned closer. The flashlight beam hit Neil's eyes directly, forcing him to squint. Step out of the vehicle. I have a card. Medical. I said step out. Neil complied. Slowly, carefully. He reached for the door handle, pushed it open, swung his legs out. His right leg chose that moment to remind him of its limitations. The stroke had weakened the entire right side. Not paralyzed, just diminished. Like an engine running on 5 cylinders instead of 6. Most days, it didn't matter. But getting out of a low sedan at night with a flashlight in his eyes and an impatient officer waiting, he stumbled. Not fell, just stumbled. A momentary loss of balance corrected in half a second, but half a second was enough. Can't even stand up straight, Fenwick's voice carried now, pitched to reach the body camera and dash cam recording the encounter. Definitely showing signs of intoxication. I'm not... Neil steadied himself against the car door. Drunk. I had a stroke. 3 years. Sure you did. Fenwick's hand closed on Neil's arm, gripped tight enough to leave marks. Turn around. Hands on the vehicle. My wallet. Neil's voice came stronger now, desperation forcing the words through the blockade. There's a card. It explains, I don't need a card to know drunk when I see it. Fenwick spun him, shoved him against the Honda's hood. The metal was still warm from the engine, but cooling rapidly in the March night air. Neil's cheek pressed into it. His hands splayed flat on either side of his head. Behind him, Fenwick's radio crackled. Unit 7-4 to dispatch. Got a 1055, suspected DUI. Route 123, just past Braddock. Requesting backup and breathalyzer. Copy, 7-4, backup en route. Neil closed his eyes, focused on breathing, on staying calm, on remembering every detail that his voice might later fail to convey. Badge number, 4371. Time of stop, 9:51 p.m. Time of exit from vehicle, 9:54. Time of physical contact, 9:54 and approximately 30 seconds. Location, Route 123, approximately 200 yards south of Braddock Road intersection. Weather, clear. Temperature, approximately 42 degrees. Details, always details. They would matter later. This is just the beginning. If you want to see what happens when the system messes with the wrong person, subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss part 2. The second patrol car arrived at 10:07 p.m. Neil had been standing with his hands on the hood for 13 minutes. His right leg had begun to shake, muscle fatigue combined with the cold, but he didn't move, didn't shift position, didn't do anything that could be interpreted as non-compliance. The new officer approached, younger than Fenwick, female. Name tag read Daltrey. What do we have? Old guy, slurring, can barely stand. Fenwick gestured at Neil with the flashlight. Classic DUI. Daltrey circled to where she could see Neil's face. Her expression was harder to read than Fenwick's, professional mask firmly in place, but something in her eyes suggested calculation rather than sympathy. You carrying any weapons? Needles? Anything that might stick me? Neil shook his head. Use your words. No. The cold was making his speech worse. The stress. The adrenaline doing nothing to help the neural pathways that had been damaged 3 years ago. No weapons. I'm trying to tell you. He's been trying to tell me a lot of things. Fenwick's voice dripped contempt, none of them in complete sentences. Sir, I'm going to pat you down for safety. Don't move. Daltrey's hands were professional but thorough. Sides, back, legs. She extracted his wallet, opened it. Medical card here. She held it up. Says he has aphasia. Neil felt a moment of hope. Finally. Someone reading. Someone understanding. Aphasia? Fenwick squinted at the card. Is that even a real thing? It's a speech disorder. Daltrey's tone was neutral, usually from stroke or brain injury. Could be fake. These disability cards aren't hard to get. It's from Fairfax Neurology. Daltrey examined the card more closely. Has a doctor's name and phone number. At 10 p.m. on a Saturday night? Fenwick shook his head. We can't verify that. And his behavior is consistent with intoxication, slurred speech, unsteady gait, confusion. I'm not confused. Neil forced the words out, willing his tongue to cooperate. I know exactly what's happening. You're violating procedure. The words hung in the air. Both officers stared at him. What did you say? Fenwick stepped closer. Procedure. Neil's heart was racing, but his voice came steadier now, anger providing what calm couldn't. A DA requires accommodation. You haven't called my doctor, haven't provided alternative communication. Fenwick's face darkened. You lawyering me? I'm citing the law. Daltrey shifted her weight. Something flickered across her face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint of concern about where this encounter was heading. Sarge, maybe we should do our jobs. Fenwick cut her off. Breathalyzer, now. The device appeared. Plastic tube, digital readout, standard equipment. Blow into this. Neil shook his head. That wasn't a request. I refuse. Neil's voice was barely above a whisper now, his throat tight with the effort of speaking. Virginia Code 18.2-268.2. Implied consent requires probable cause. You have no cause, only assumptions. The silence stretched. Fenwick's jaw worked. His hand moved to his hip, not to his weapon, but to the handcuffs hanging there. Refusal to comply with a lawful order. His voice was cold. Turn around. You're under arrest. For what? Obstruction. Resisting. We'll sort out the charges at the station. Daltrey stepped forward. Sarge. Write it up, Daltrey. Suspected DUI, refusal of breathalyzer, non-compliance with lawful orders. Fenwick grabbed Neil's arm again, wrenched it behind his back. And note that he was combative and argumentative throughout the encounter. I haven't been combative. The handcuffs clicked shut. Too tight. Metal biting into wrists. Now you can explain all about your medical condition to the booking officer. Fenwick's breath was hot against Neil's ear. "Or maybe you'll have sobered up by then and remember how to talk like a normal person." He was marched to the patrol car, shoved into the back seat. The door slammed. Through the window, Neil watched Daltrey return to his Honda. Watched her collect his wallet, his phone, his keys. She glanced at the medical card one more time before tucking it into an evidence bag. He saw her hesitate, saw something that might have been doubt cross her face. But doubt wasn't enough. Doubt didn't stop the arrest. Doubt didn't prevent the humiliation. Doubt didn't change the fact that in approximately 45 minutes, Cornelius Odom, decorated intelligence instructor, 34-year veteran of the DIA, trainer of directors, would be fingerprinted and photographed and placed in a holding cell like a common criminal. Because his mouth didn't work the way it used to. Because his legs sometimes forgot how to balance. Because 2 officers had decided what they were seeing before they bothered to look. The patrol car pulled away from the curb. Neil closed his eyes, began cataloging again. Time of arrest, 10:12 p.m. Location, Route 123 southbound. Arresting officer, Sergeant Garrett Fenwick, badge 4371. Secondary officer, Officer Daltrey, first name unknown, badge number not observed, charges stated. Charges: obstruction, resisting, suspected DUI, physical force used, arm wrenched, handcuffs applied tightly, shoved into vehicle. The details would matter. They always did. Fairfax County Police Station, 11:23 p.m. The booking area smelled of disinfectant and despair. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pallor that made even healthy skin look jaundiced. A drunk tank in the corner held 3 occupants, 2 unconscious, one muttering to himself in Spanish. Neil sat on a metal bench, hands still cuffed behind his back, waiting. He'd been waiting for 47 minutes. No one had offered water. No one had asked about medical conditions. No one had acknowledged his repeated requests to make a phone call. 2 officers passed the glass partition that separated booking from the main station. Their voices carried through the gap left for document exchange. "Sarge brought in a zombie." Officer Pete Ramsey, according to his name tag. "Guy can barely talk." "Drunk or retarded?" Officer Tina Coyle, younger, crueler. "Does it matter?" Fenwick's voice, approaching from somewhere behind them. "Same result." They laughed. Neil heard every word. He didn't react, didn't give them the satisfaction. Just added it to the catalog. Time, 11:28 p.m. Officers Ramsey and Coyle, derogatory comments regarding disability. Fenwick present and participating. The processing officer finally appeared. Bored, mechanical. He took Neil's fingerprints, ink and digital both, without looking at his face. Photographed him against a white wall. Collected the contents of his pockets. Wallet, phone, pen, notebook. The officer paused at the notebook, flipped through pages of precise handwriting. "What's this? Some kind of diary?" Neil didn't answer. Couldn't answer fast enough before the officer lost interest and tossed it into the property bag with everything else. "Empty your pockets, all of them. I need to make a phone call. Phone calls are for after processing. I have a right. You have the right to stand there and wait your turn." The officer stamped a form without reading it. "Cell 4. Someone will get you when your lawyer shows up." "I haven't called a lawyer." "Then I guess you'll be waiting a while." The cell was 8 by 10 feet, concrete floor, metal toilet. Bench that doubled as a bed. One other occupant, a young white man with facial tattoos who was currently using his shoe as a pillow. The door clanged shut. Neil sat on the bench, closed his eyes, focused. The catalog was all in his head now, but he wouldn't lose it. 34 years of training had ensured that. He could hold 100 details in perfect sequence for days if necessary. Could reconstruct conversations word for word. Could rebuild timelines with second-by-second precision. His voice might fail him. His body might betray him. But his mind remained his own. And his mind was already building the case that would eventually bring this station, these officers, and their casual cruelty into the harsh light of federal scrutiny. They didn't know that yet. They would. Sunday, 9:18 a.m. Neil was released without charges. The explanation, such as it was, came from the desk sergeant who processed his discharge. Insufficient evidence for DUI, no breathalyzer results, probable cause question marks. The DA's office had declined to prosecute, but the arrest stayed on record. The incident report remained in the system. The words suspected intoxication and erratic behavior and combative and uncooperative would follow him through every background check for the rest of his life. Loretta picked him up outside the station. Her face when she saw him, the rumpled clothes, the bruises forming on his wrists from too tight handcuffs, the exhaustion in his eyes, crumpled for just a moment before she gathered herself. "Neil," she hugged him, careful of his obviously sore arms. "What happened? They said you were drunk." Neil shook his head. She guided him to the car, helped him into the passenger seat, drove without speaking while he typed slowly on his phone, composing an explanation that his voice couldn't manage. The synthetic voice finally spoke his words. "They didn't listen. They saw a black man who couldn't talk straight and decided I was drunk, or high, or stupid. They never looked at the medical card, never called the doctor, never gave me a chance to explain." Loretta's hands tightened on the wheel. "Those sons of—" She stopped herself, drew a breath. "What do you want to do?" Neil typed, "Document, then file." "File a complaint?" He nodded. "Against the police." Her voice was flat. "Was in this county. You know how that usually goes, Neil." He typed, "I know exactly how it goes. I also know how it can go differently. If you have documentation, if you have patience, if you know the right levers to pull." Loretta glanced at him. Something shifted in her expression, recognition, maybe, of the man her brother-in-law had been before the stroke. The man who had spent decades in a world where documentation wasn't just useful, but essential, where patterns of evidence could bring down operations that seemed invulnerable. "You sure you're up for this?" Neil typed, "They made me bleed on my own car. They called me retarded. They laughed while I sat in cuffs." A pause while he composed the next sentence. "Yes, I'm up for this." The complaint took 2 days to prepare, 14 pages, single-spaced, comprehensive. Neil worked at his kitchen table, surrounded by the artifacts of the encounter. The medical card with Fenwick's fingerprints still visible on the laminated surface. The property receipt from booking. The discharge papers with their carefully neutral language. His own notes, reconstructed from memory into a minute-by-minute timeline. He cited statutes, Virginia Code sections for unlawful arrest, failure to accommodate disability, excessive force. Federal law, ADA Title 242, USC, Section 12,132, which required public entities to provide reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act amendments of 2008, which explicitly included neurological conditions like aphasia. He documented the violations. Failure to acknowledge or verify medical documentation. Failure to provide alternative communication methods. Use of force disproportionate to any threat posed. Verbal harassment and derogatory language regarding disability. Denial of phone call within reasonable time. He named names. Sergeant Garrett Fenwick, Badge 4371. Officer Daltrey, first name unknown, badge number to be obtained through discovery. Processing Officer, name unknown, badge number to be obtained through discovery. When it was finished, he read it through 3 times, made corrections, tightened language, ensured every claim was supported by specific verifiable detail. The Internal Affairs Office of the Fairfax County Police Department was located in a squat brick building on Chainbridge Road. Neil arrived at 8:57 a.m. on Tuesday, complaint in hand. The receptionist, a civilian employee with kind eyes and a weary expression that suggested she'd seen too many complaints go nowhere, looked up as he approached. "Can I help you?" Neil placed the complaint on the counter, pointed to the cover page. Formal complaint. Re-incident, March 8, 2024. The receptionist picked it up, began reading. Her eyebrows rose with each page. "Sir, did a lawyer help you with this?" Neil typed on his phone. The synthetic voice answered, "No, I know how to document." "I can see that." She set the complaint down. "This is very thorough." Neil typed, "Will it be investigated?" "All complaints are investigated." The words were automatic, rehearsed. "The process takes time. You'll receive notification when a determination is made." He typed, "How much time?" "It varies." She met his eyes. "I'm not going to lie to you, sir. These things can take months, sometimes longer." Neil nodded. He'd expected as much. He typed, "I'll wait, as long as it takes." The receptionist stamped the complaint with a receipt number, I-2024-0892, and handed him a copy. Her expression held something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the weary recognition of someone who'd seen this script play out too many times before. "Is there anything else I can help you with, sir?" Neil typed, "Yes. I want copies of all body cam footage from the incident, both officers. You'll need to file a FOIA request for that. Separate form, different department." "I know." He typed, "I'll file it today." He left the building at 9:23 a.m., drove directly to the county administrator's office on Government Center Parkway, filed the FOIA request with the same meticulous detail as the complaint. Virginia Code Section 2.2-3704 gave them 5 business days to respond. He would count every one. The first callback came not from Internal Affairs, but from Councilwoman Pamela Sternwood. Neil recognized the number from the HOA directory. He let it ring to voicemail, then played the message on speaker. "Mr. Odom, this is Pamela Sternwood calling. I heard about your situation this past weekend, and I wanted to reach out personally." Her voice was warm, concerned, the voice of a politician who'd learned to project empathy without actually feeling it. "I'm sure this has all been very distressing. If there's anything I can do to help, any way to smooth things over, please don't hesitate to call. We're all neighbors here, after all." Smooth things over. Neil replayed the message, noted the timestamp, made a record of the exact wording. He did not call back. 3 hours later, his phone rang again. Different number this time. He answered. "Mr. Odom, this is Lieutenant Victor Crane with the Fairfax County Police Department. I'm following up on the incident from Saturday night." Neil waited. "I understand you've filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. I want you to know that we take all complaints seriously." The tone was professional, neutral, revealing nothing. "However, I've reviewed the initial reports and I have some concerns about the characterization of events. Would you be willing to come in and discuss this? Help us understand your perspective?" Neil typed. The synthetic voice replied, "I've provided a 14-page written statement. My perspective is documented. Written statements are helpful, but face-to-face conversations often clarify misunderstandings. There's no misunderstanding. Your officers arrested me without probable cause, failed to accommodate my documented disability, used excessive force, and made derogatory comments about my medical condition. All of this is detailed in my complaint." A pause on the line. "Mr. Odom, I'm trying to help you here. Then investigate the complaint according to procedure. Follow the evidence. Hold the officers accountable. That's how you can help." Another pause, longer this time. "You seem very familiar with procedure." "I am. May I ask your professional background?" Neil typed, "You may ask. I'm not required to answer. Is there anything else, Lieutenant?" The line went silent for a moment. When Crane spoke again, his voice had cooled considerably. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Odom." The call ended. Neil made a note. 11:47 a.m. Lieutenant Victor Crane, follow-up call. Attempted to arrange informal meeting. Declined. Crane expressed interest in professional background. Evasive. The pieces were beginning to move. Day 5. No response to FOIA request. Day 6. Automated acknowledgement. Your request is being processed. Day 7. Nothing. Day 8. Nothing. Day 9. Neil called the records office. Your request is under review, the clerk said. Some of the materials may be exempt under ongoing investigation provisions. What investigation? I'm not at liberty to say. My complaint is with Internal Affairs. If they're using that as grounds to withhold footage. Sir, I don't make these decisions. I just process requests. You'll receive a formal response when one is available. The formal response arrived on day 12. Neil opened the envelope at his kitchen table, read the single page of bureaucratic language twice to make sure he understood it correctly. FOIA request, number 2024-3847, partial denial, pursuant to Virginia Code, Section 2.2-3706. Certain materials responsive to your request are exempt from disclosure as part of an active internal investigation. The following materials are released. Dispatch log, attached. The following materials are withheld. Body cam footage from Sergeant G. Fenwick, body cam footage from Officer B. Daltrey, dash camera footage from Unit 7-4. Reason for withholding. Active investigation. Disclosure would interfere with law enforcement proceedings. You may appeal this decision within 30 days. Neil set the letter down. They were hiding the footage, which meant the footage showed something they didn't want him to see, which meant the footage contradicted their official story. He picked up his phone, called Carmen Delgado. Carmen's office was small, a 2-room suite in an Arlington strip mall, sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. But the walls were lined with framed news clippings and court victory announcements, and the woman herself radiated the kind of focused intensity that came from years of fighting battles that most lawyers wouldn't touch. Mr. Odom, she gestured to the chair across from her desk. Tell me everything. He'd prepared a summary document, 23 pages now, incorporating the FOIA denial and his notes on the Crane phone call and Sternwood's voicemail. He handed it over and waited while she read. It took her 40 minutes. She didn't skip pages, didn't skim, made notes in the margins, asked clarifying questions at 3 points, waiting patiently while his phone translated his typed responses into speech. When she finished, she set the document down and looked at him directly. Mr. Odom, you have a solid case. ADA violations are clear. They had documented evidence of your disability and failed to accommodate. Possible Section 1983 claim for civil rights violations under color of law. Maybe even Fourth Amendment issues with the arrest itself. Neil typed, But this will take months, maybe years. The department will fight every step, delay discovery, dispute evidence, file motion after motion to exhaust your resources and your patience. They'll argue the officers acted in good faith, that your behavior was genuinely consistent with intoxication, that they made reasonable judgment calls under difficult circumstances. They're wrong. I know they're wrong. But being wrong and being held accountable are two different things. Carmen leaned back in her chair. I have to be honest with you. Most people who come to me with cases like this, they get tired. They settle for small amounts just to make it go away. They're not prepared for how long and how hard this fight can be. Neil typed, I am prepared. How can you be so sure? A long pause while he composed his response. Because I spent 34 years in a world where documentation and patience were the only weapons that worked, where cases took years to build and moments to lose if you got sloppy, where the opposition had unlimited resources and institutional protection and every advantage except the truth. He met her eyes. I've seen how institutions protect themselves. I've also seen how they can be broken. Not with anger, not with speeches, with evidence, with persistence, with the accumulated weight of proof that can't be denied. Carmen studied him. Something shifted in her expression. Professional interest sharpening into something more like respect. What exactly did you do for 34 years, Mr. Odom? Neil typed. I taught people how to analyze threats, how to find patterns in chaos, how to build cases that could survive scrutiny. A pause. I was good at it. I can see that. Carmen picked up the document again. All right, Mr. Odom, I'll take your case. No fee unless we win. But I need you to understand something. What? Win or lose, this is going to get ugly. They're going to dig into your background, find anything they can use against you, and when they realize how thorough your documentation is, how prepared you are, they're going to fight even harder. Because people like you, people who can actually hold them accountable, they're the ones the system fears most. Neil typed. Good. They should be afraid. Carmen smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just found worthy prey. Then let's get started. 2 weeks after the incident, the pattern became unmistakable on day 10. Neil first noticed the patrol car at 7:15 a.m. during his morning walk. Unit 74, he recognized the number from the night of his arrest. It cruised past slowly, windows dark, driver invisible. Coincidence, perhaps. Routine patrol. Except it appeared again at 9:42 a.m. when he walked to the mailbox. And again at 2:17 p.m. when he returned from the grocery store. And again at 6:31 p.m. when he stepped onto his porch to watch the sunset. Neil documented each sighting. Time, location, direction of travel, duration of visibility before the car moved on. By day 14, he had 23 logged observations. The car never stopped, never made contact, just appeared, often enough to make sure he knew he was being watched, seldom enough to maintain plausible deniability. Intimidation. He'd seen the tactic before, in other contexts, other lives. The message was always the same. We know where you are. We can reach you. Think carefully about what you're doing. He added the surveillance to his documentation, sent an update to Carmen. This is concerning, she replied in an email. But we can use it, keep documenting, photographs if possible. Neil began carrying a small camera on his walks, captured images of Unit 7-4 passing his house at 8:04 a.m. on a Tuesday, passing the grocery store parking lot at 3:15 p.m. on a Wednesday, parked, engine running, at the corner of Bellflower and Oak Ridge at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday. The photographs went into the file. The file grew thicker. The Safeway incident happened on day 17. Neil was loading groceries into his trunk, milk, bread, vegetables, the same items he bought every week, when the patrol car pulled into the adjacent space. Not Unit 7-4 this time. Different number. But the officer who stepped out was familiar. Sergeant Garrett Fenwick. Mr. Odom, Fenwick's voice carried across the narrow gap between vehicles. Funny seeing you here. Neil continued loading groceries. Didn't respond. Didn't look up. Heard you filed a complaint. Fenwick leaned against his patrol car, arms crossed, posture radiating casual menace. Internal Affairs is looking into it. Silence. Neil placed the last bag in the trunk, closed it carefully. You know, complaints have a way of backfiring. Fenwick pushed off from the car, took a step closer. Ask around. People who make trouble tend to have trouble. Neil finally turned, met Fenwick's eyes directly. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Neil reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, made a show of checking messages while his thumb found the voice recorder app and pressed record. Something you want to say to me, Sergeant? Fenwick's eyes narrowed. Flicked to the phone, back to Neil's face. Just being neighborly. His voice had changed, more careful now, words chosen with awareness that they might be captured. Hope your medical situation improves. Must be hard, not being able to communicate clearly. My communication is fine. Neil's voice came slow but steady. I document everything, every conversation, every encounter, every patrol car that happens to drive past my house 23 times in 2 weeks. Fenwick's expression flickered. Surprise, then anger, quickly suppressed. Free country. Officers can patrol where they want. And citizens can record what they observe. Neil held up the phone slightly. Have a good day, Sergeant. He turned, walked to his driver's door, got in the car, and drove away without looking back. His hands were shaking, but the recording was saved. Another piece of evidence for the file. Nick. The pressure is building, the evidence is mounting, and somewhere, a phone call is coming that will change everything. But first, subscribe and hit the bell, because what these officers don't know about their target is about to explode in Part 2. Day 19, 9:37 p.m. Neil walked home from Loretta's house, just 3 blocks, a route he'd taken hundreds of times. The night was clear and cold, stars visible despite the suburban light pollution. He didn't see the patrol car until its headlights pinned him on the sidewalk. Doors opened. 2 figures emerged. Fenwick, recognizable by silhouette alone, and another officer, taller, younger. "Evening, Mr. Odom." Fenwick's voice carried the oily satisfaction of a man who'd been waiting for this moment. "Walking alone at night? Suspicious behavior." Neil stopped, kept his hands visible at his sides. "I live 3 blocks from here." "Is that right?" Fenwick circled closer. The other officer, name tag reading Wexler, flanked from the opposite direction. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this neighborhood. Thought we'd check it out." Neil reached for his phone. "Hands where we can see them." Wexler's voice was sharp. "Drop the phone." "I'm recording this encounter." "I said drop it." The phone clattered to the sidewalk. Neil's heart hammered, but his face remained impassive. "Turn around." Fenwick's hand on his shoulder, spinning him. "Hands on the car." "You have no probable cause." "We have reasonable suspicion." Fenwick's breath was hot against Neil's ear. Man walking alone at night, acting nervous, reaching for objects, could be armed, could be dangerous. The pat-down was rough, aggressive, hands shoving into pockets, yanking at clothing, searching with more force than any legitimate safety check required. "Find anything?" Wexler asked. "Wallet, keys, pen." Fenwick's voice dripped disappointment. "Nothing exciting." "Too bad." Neil felt hands grip his shoulders, spin him back around. Then a shove, hard, toward the patrol car. His weak right leg buckled. His head struck the doorframe. Blood, warm and immediate, began running down his forehead. "Oops." Fenwick's voice held no remorse. "Maybe watch your step next time, Mr. Odom. These sidewalks can be slippery." Neil's vision swam. He pressed his hand to his forehead, felt the wetness, saw the red on his fingers. "Looks like you hurt yourself." Wexler was writing something in a notepad. "Want us to call an ambulance?" "What I want—" Neil's voice came stronger than he expected, adrenaline cutting through the aphasia fog. "Is your badge numbers. Both of you." Silence. "We're conducting a field interview. No badge numbers required." "That's incorrect. Under Departmental Policy 4-27, officers must identify themselves upon request during any citizen contact." The words flowed, rough, halting, but complete. "Your refusal is documented." Fenwick stared at him. For the first time, something like uncertainty crossed his face. "Who the hell are you?" Neil didn't answer, just bent down, slowly, carefully, keeping his movements visible, and picked up his phone. The screen was cracked, but the recording app still showed active. "I'll be going home now. Unless you're placing me under arrest." Another long silence. "Get out of here." Fenwick's voice was flat. "And watch where you're walking. Accidents happen." Neil walked the remaining 3 blocks with blood dripping into his eye. His head throbbed. His hands shook with delayed reaction. But the phone had recorded everything, and his memory held the rest. The emergency room at Fairfax Hospital was quiet at 10:45 p.m. on a Tuesday. Neil sat on an examination table while Dr. Amelia Foster, young, efficient, with the kind of focused compassion that came from choosing emergency medicine as a calling rather than a career, cleaned the wound on his forehead. 4 stitches. She examined her work. "You'll have a small scar. What happened?" Neil had prepared for this question, had his phone ready with the text typed out. The synthetic voice spoke. "I was pushed into a police car during what they called a field interview. My leg gave out from a prior stroke. My head hit the door frame." Dr. Foster's hands paused. Her eyes met his. Are you saying the police did this? Neil nodded. Do you want me to document that in your medical record? Another nod. She turned to her computer, began typing. Patient presence with 2-centimeter laceration to right forehead, consistent with blunt force trauma against hard surface. Patient reports injury occurred during police encounter. She paused. Anything else? Neil typed, Please note that I have documented expressive aphasia from a stroke 3 years ago, and that I do not present as intoxicated. Dr. Foster typed that too. No alcohol or substances detected. Patient has documented aphasia secondary to CVA. Does not present as intoxicated. She printed the record, handed him a copy. Mr. Odom, I'm required to report injuries that may have resulted from assault. I'll be filing this with hospital administration. If you want to pursue this further, I already am, his typed response. This is incident number 2 with the same sergeant. I have an attorney. I have documentation. I have recordings. Dr. Foster studied him for a long moment. You know how these things usually go? Yes. I also know how they can go differently. She nodded slowly. Then I hope it goes differently for you, Mr. Odom. I've treated too many people with stories like yours. Very few of them have the resources or the persistence to fight back. Neil typed, I have both. I can see that. She handed him a prescription for pain medication. Take care of yourself. And if this happens again, come back. I'll document that too. Neil left the hospital at 11:32 p.m. The stitches pulled when he moved his forehead. The prescription sat unused in his pocket. He didn't want anything that might affect his cognition, his memory, his ability to document. He drove home carefully, parked in his usual spot, walked to his front door with blood still crusted in his eyebrow, and found Walter Keene sitting on his porch. Good Lord, Neil. Walter rose, eyes widening at the wound. What happened? Neil unlocked the door, gestured for Walter to follow him inside. In the kitchen, he typed out the explanation. Walter read it on the phone screen, his face darkening with each sentence. Fenwick. Again? Neil nodded. And this Wexler? Another nod. Walter set the phone down. His hands were trembling, not with weakness, but with anger. Neil, you need to go to the FBI. This is beyond local cops. This is systematic harassment, retaliation. It's federal territory. Neil typed, Not yet. The case isn't strong enough. Strong enough? They split your head open. And their reports will say I tripped, that I fell on my own, that they were trying to help me. Neil's typed words appeared on the screen. I need more than my word against theirs. I need footage. I need other witnesses. I need patterns that can't be explained away. Walter stared at him. You're building a case. I'm building an airtight case. How long have you been doing this kind of thing? The question hung in the air. Neil typed slowly. A long time, Walter. A very long time. Walter didn't ask for clarification, didn't push for details. He'd learned in 7 years of morning walks and quiet conversations that some questions were better left unasked. What can I do to help? Neil typed, Be a witness. I'm going to the community center tomorrow to request security camera footage from the streets around here. If they have anything showing patrol cars near my house, that's corroboration. I'll come with you. You don't have to. Neil. Walter's voice was firm. Whatever you did before you retired, I don't know and I don't need to know. But I know what I see now. A good man being targeted because he dared to complain. That's not something I can watch happen and do nothing. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Neil typed, Thank you, Walter. Walter nodded, rose to leave, paused at the door. 0600 tomorrow? Neil almost smiled. 0600. The FOIA appeal took 2 weeks to process. During that time, Carmen filed for expedited release of body cam footage based on demonstrable public interest and ongoing pattern of potential misconduct. The county attorney's office responded with the bureaucratic equivalent of a shrug. The community center's security cameras, it turned out, had been offline for maintenance during the relevant period. 3 weeks of footage, conveniently unavailable. A dead end, or an obstruction. Neil documented it anyway. Then, on day 31, something shifted. His phone rang at 3:47 p.m. Unknown number, Northern Virginia area code. Mr. Odom, this is Sergeant Owen Pritchard with Internal Affairs. I'm the investigator assigned to your complaint. Neil waited. I've been reviewing the file. The initial reports, your documentation, the timeline. I have some questions I'd like to ask you in person. Neil typed. The phone spoke. Is this a formal interview? It's a follow-up conversation. I want to hear your account directly. My account is documented in the complaint. 14 pages. I've read it 3 times. Pritchard's voice carried something unexpected, not the dismissive professionalism of Crane, but genuine interest. Mr. Odom, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of complaints. Most of them are emotional, vague, hard to verify. Yours is... He trailed off. Mine is what? Thorough. The word landed with weight. Extremely thorough. The kind of thorough that suggests someone who knows how to build a case. Neil said nothing. I'd like to understand more about that. More about you. Not officially, just as context. Would you be willing to meet? Neil considered. Every instinct told him to be careful. Investigators could be allies or obstacles, truth-seekers or institutional defenders. Without knowing which Pritchard was, cooperation was risky, but isolation was also risky. And eventually, the case would require someone inside the system to take it seriously. When and where? Tomorrow, if possible. My office, 10 a.m. I'll be there. The Internal Affairs Office occupied a corner of the 2nd floor of the Police Administrative Building. Sergeant Owen Pritchard met Neil in the lobby and escorted him personally through the security checkpoint, a courtesy that hadn't been extended during the complaint filing. Pritchard was older than Neil had expected, late 40s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in law enforcement and the careful eyes of someone who'd learned to question his own institution. His office was small, cluttered with files, decorated with a single photograph of a woman and 2 teenage boys. Thank you for coming, Mr. Odom. Pritchard gestured to a chair. Can I get you coffee? Water? Neil typed, Water, please. Pritchard retrieved a bottle from a small refrigerator, handed it over, sat behind his desk. I want to be direct with you, he said. I've reviewed Sergeant Fenwick's incident report, Officer Daltrey's supplemental, the dispatch logs, and your complaint. Neil waited. They don't match. The words hung in the air. The report says you were combative and uncooperative, that you refused to comply with lawful orders, that your speech and behavior were consistent with intoxication. Pritchard opened a folder on his desk. But you documented that you provided a medical card explaining your condition, that you cited specific Virginia code sections, that you remained calm throughout the encounter. He looked up. One of you is lying, and based on what I've read, I don't think it's you. Neil typed. The body cam footage will show the truth. That's what I thought too. Pritchard's voice dropped, which is why I requested expedited access to the recordings. And? The footage from your initial traffic stop exists. I've seen it. It supports your account almost completely. Neil felt something release in his chest. Validation. After weeks of documentation and doubt, someone inside the system had seen the truth. But, Pritchard's expression darkened. The footage from the second incident, the night you were stopped walking home, is corrupted. Technical malfunction, according to the IT department. Both officers' cameras failed simultaneously. That's convenient. It's suspicious. Pritchard leaned forward. Mr. Odom, I've been doing this job for a long time. I know what genuine technical failures look like, and I know what deletions disguised as technical failures look like. This has the signature of the latter. Can you prove it? Not yet. IT Forensics is reviewing the server logs. If the files were manually deleted, there will be traces. He paused. But even if I find those traces, I need you to understand something. This department has a history of protecting its own. My recommendation for further investigation was not well received. By whom? Chief McRae and Lieutenant Crane, who was assigned to review my preliminary findings before they went to the chief. Crane interviewed me the night of my arrest. I know, which is why he should have recused himself from any review of your case. He didn't. Pritchard closed the folder. Mr. Odom, I believe you. I believe your complaint is legitimate. But I'm also telling you that the system I work for is not designed to hold itself accountable. If you're expecting justice from within, you may be disappointed. Neil typed slowly. I'm not expecting anything. I'm documenting. To what end? A long pause while Neil composed his response. 34 years ago, I learned that institutions protect themselves. They close ranks. They bury evidence. They sacrifice individuals to preserve systems. But I also learned that documentation survives, that patterns, properly documented, become impossible to deny, that enough weight, applied consistently over enough time, can crack even the strongest defenses. Pritchard studied him. What did you do for those 34 years, Mr. Odom? Neil met his gaze directly. I taught people how to find the truth, how to analyze, how to build cases that could survive any scrutiny. He typed the next words slowly, deliberately. I was very good at it. Pritchard's expression shifted. Recognition of something. Respect, maybe. Or wariness. Are you going to tell me more than that? No, not yet. But there's more to tell. Neil didn't respond. Pritchard nodded slowly. Stood. Extended his hand. Mr. Odom, I'm going to do everything I can to see that your complaint is properly investigated, but I want you to be prepared for the possibility that proper investigation leads nowhere, that the system does what it always does. Neil shook his hand. And I want you to be prepared for the possibility that I have resources you don't know about. Pritchard's eyebrows rose. What kind of resources? The kind that become relevant when local systems fail. Neil picked up his phone, typed a final message. Thank you for your honesty, Sergeant. I hope we're on the same side. I hope so too. Day 41. The body cam footage from the traffic stop was finally released through Carmen's expedited FOIA appeal. Not directly to Neil, that would have been too easy, but through a judicial order that compelled production after the county attorney's office missed 3 consecutive deadlines. Carmen called him at 4:17 p.m. It's everything you said. Everything. Her voice crackled with barely contained excitement. Fenwick approaches the car aggressive from the first second. You're calm, compliant, clearly trying to explain your condition. He cuts you off repeatedly. Daltrey reads your medical card out loud. We can hear her say, expressive aphasia. And Fenwick literally laughs and says, is that even a real thing? Neil closed his eyes, let the vindication wash over him. There's more. Carmen's voice sobered. At the 23-minute mark, while you're sitting in the patrol car, Fenwick and Daltrey have a conversation they apparently thought was private. The body cam audio picks it up. What do they say? Fenwick says, and I quote, "Old guy's gonna be trouble. You can tell by the way he talks, not drunk, just smart. Those are the ones you gotta shut down early." Daltrey says, "What if he complains?" And Fenwick says, "Who's gonna believe him? He can barely string a sentence together." And we've got the report. Silence. Neil, are you there? I'm here. The words came slow but steady. They knew I wasn't drunk, and they arrested me anyway. That's what the footage shows. It's consciousness of guilt. It's malice. It's everything we need to take this federal. Can we? We can, and I think we should. Carmen's voice turned serious. But I want you to understand what that means. Federal complaint goes to the DOJ Civil Rights Division. They'll investigate, potentially open a pattern or practice inquiry into the whole department. It's bigger than your case. It's a public statement that the local system has failed. Neil typed, "The local system has failed." I know. So does Pritchard. I spoke with him this morning. He's prepared to testify that his investigation was obstructed, that his recommendations were rejected, that there's evidence of coordinated cover-up. What changed his mind? He saw the footage, same footage we just got. Carmen paused. Neil, this man is risking his career to do the right thing. He's not asking for anything in return. He just believes you, believes this matters. Neil sat with that for a moment. Then let's make it matter. I'll start drafting the federal complaint tonight. But Neil, I have to ask, before this goes any further, is there anything about your background that's going to come out? Anything that might complicate things? A long pause. When the time is right, Neil typed slowly, some things will become relevant. Things that will help, not hurt. But the timing has to be right. Can you at least tell me what we're talking about? Neil considered. Carmen had earned his trust, had fought for his case when easier options were available, had believed him when the system didn't. But some revelations needed to land at exactly the right moment, needed to arrive with maximum impact. And that moment wasn't now. I taught intelligence analysts for the federal government, he typed, for 34 years. My former students hold positions at the highest levels of the national security community. Silence on the line. How high? As high as it gets. More silence. Neil. Carmen's voice was careful now. Are you telling me you have connections that could accelerate this? I'm telling you that when local systems fail, federal systems can be engaged. And I'm telling you that I know how to engage them. Why haven't you already? Because it matters how this case is built. The evidence has to be unassailable. The documentation has to be complete. When I make that call, and I will make it, I want whoever answers to see a case that's already won. Not a personal favor, not pulling strings. Justice earned through proper process. Carmen absorbed this. You're not just building a case, you're building a precedent. I'm building a case that can't be ignored, can't be buried, can't be explained away as one disabled man's grudge against officers who made a judgment call. How much longer? Not long now, the footage changed things. Pritchard's willingness to testify changes things. A few more pieces, and the picture will be complete. And then? Neil typed the response slowly, deliberately. Then I make a phone call to someone who owes me a very old debt, and everything changes. Day 47. The letter arrived from the Internal Affairs Division. Neil opened it at his kitchen table, morning light streaming through the window, coffee cooling beside him. R.E. Complaint number Y-2024-0892. Dear Mr. Odom, after a thorough review of your complaint and all available evidence, the Internal Affairs Division has concluded its investigation. The findings are as follows. Allegation 1. Failure to accommodate documented disability. Finding, unfounded. Officers acted reasonably based on observations at the scene. Allegation 2. Excessive force during arrest. Finding, unfounded. Force used was consistent with department policy. Allegation 3. Verbal harassment regarding disability. Finding, not sustained. Evidence is insufficient to prove or disprove the allegation. Allegation 4. Denial of phone call. Finding, not sustained. Processing delays were within acceptable parameters. Allegation 5. False statements in incident report. Finding, unfounded. Report reflects officers' reasonable perceptions at the time. This case is now closed. You have 30 days to appeal this determination. Neil read it twice. Then he set it down, picked up his phone, typed a message to Carmen. I.A. closed the case. All allegations unfounded or not sustained. Her response came in seconds. Expected. Pritchard warned me they'd do this. His testimony wasn't included in the final review. They buried it. Neil typed, Then it's time. Time for what? He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to his small home office, the room he'd used for decades to prepare briefings, analyze intelligence, train the analysts who would go on to lead America's intelligence agencies. On the wall hung certificates he rarely looked at, commendations he never discussed. A photograph, faded now, of a younger man in a suit standing beside a much younger man who would, in 23 years, become the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Neil sat at his desk, opened a drawer, retrieved a worn address book, physical, analog, the kind that couldn't be hacked or subpoenaed or accidentally deleted, found the number he needed. It wasn't the public number, wasn't the official line. It was a private channel, maintained for exactly this kind of moment. He picked up his phone, dialed, ring, ring. "This line is secure. Identify yourself." Neil typed. The synthetic voice spoke. "This is Cornelius Odom, authorization 77 Delta Echo 4, requesting Director Stafford." A pause. "Stand by." 30 seconds of silence. Then a click. A new voice. One Neil hadn't heard in over 5 years, but recognized instantly. "Mr. Odom?" Jerome Stafford's voice carried surprise, concern, and something like reverence. "Sir, is everything all right?" Neil typed his response. The phone spoke it. "Jerome, it's been a long time. 23 years since graduation, 5 since retirement, since... Sir, I assumed you'd want to be left alone." I do." Neil typed slowly, carefully choosing words. "But something has happened. Something I need help with. Not operational, personal." "Anything, you know that." Neil began typing the summary: the traffic stop, the arrest, the harassment, the cover-up, the failed internal investigation, the footage that proved everything, and the system that had chosen to ignore it. It took 15 minutes to convey the full scope. When he finished, the line was silent for a long moment. "They did what to you?" The words exploded through the phone's speaker with an intensity that surprised even Neil. Jerome Stafford, who briefed presidents, who managed global crises, who maintained perfect composure under pressures that would break ordinary people, sounded genuinely shaken. "Mr. Odom, you taught me everything I know about analysis. You trained 3 directors before me, 2 NSA directors, half the senior staff at Langley. You served this country for 34 years in ways that will never be declassified. And some county cops treated you like this?" Neil typed. "Like an old black man who couldn't talk straight. That's all they saw." "That's not all you are. That's not even a fraction of what you are." "I know, but they don't. And that's the point." Silence again. When Stafford spoke, his voice had shifted. Professional now. Controlled. The voice of a man accustomed to solving problems at global scale. "What do you need from me?" "I don't want special treatment," Neil typed. "I don't want you to make calls that circumvent proper process. I want the system to work the way it's supposed to work, with accountability, transparency, consequences." "Then what can I do?" "The local system has failed. My attorney is preparing a federal complaint to the DOJ Civil Rights Division. What I need is for that complaint to land on the desk of someone who will take it seriously. Not bury it. Not slow walk it. Actually investigate." Stafford considered. "I can make sure it reaches the right people. Not intervene directly. That would be inappropriate, and you'd never ask for that. But ensure it doesn't get lost in the bureaucracy. That's all I need." "You're sure?" "Because if you wanted me to..." "I'm sure." Neil's typed response was firm. "I want them to be held accountable because the evidence demands it, not because a CIA director made phone calls." A pause. "You always did believe in doing things the right way, sir, even when faster options were available." "The right way lasts. Shortcuts get forgotten." "I remember. You taught me that." Stafford's voice softened. "Mr. Odom, I'm going to make some calls. Legal channels only. Nothing inappropriate. But within 48 hours, your complaint will be in front of people who can actually do something with it." "Thank you, Jerome." "Don't thank me. I owe you more than I can ever repay. You gave me my career, my methodology, my way of seeing the world." A pause. And right now, watching what's happened to you, it makes me ashamed of the country I work to protect." Neil typed, "Don't be ashamed, be effective. That's always been your strength." "I'll try, sir. I'll try to make you proud." "You already have. Every day since you graduated." The call ended. Neil sat in his office, surrounded by artifacts of a life most people would never know about. Certificates that couldn't be displayed publicly, photographs that told stories he'd never share. He'd made the call. Now the real pressure would begin. And somewhere in Washington, the machinery of federal accountability was starting to move, slowly at first, but with the inexorable weight of an institution that, when properly motivated, could shake the foundations of any local power structure. Fairfax County Police Department didn't know it yet, but they were about to discover that the old black man they'd dismissed as drunk, stupid, and insignificant had just connected them to the attention of the most powerful intelligence apparatus on Earth. Not for revenge, for justice. The kind that lasted. 48 hours passed. Neil maintained his routine. Morning walks at 6 a.m., documentation of patrol car sightings, correspondence with Carmen about the federal complaint. But beneath the surface calm, something had shifted. A clock was now ticking that no one in Fairfax County knew about. The call came at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday. Carmen's voice vibrated with barely contained energy. "Neil, I just got off the phone with the DOJ Civil Rights Division. They're opening a preliminary inquiry." Neil set down his coffee, typed, "How preliminary?" "Preliminary enough that they're requesting all documentation from your case. Body cam footage, internal affairs files, Pritchard's original recommendations, everything the county has been trying to bury." "Timeline?" "They want materials within 10 business days. And Neil..." She paused. "They mentioned pattern or practice concerns. Not just your case. They're looking at the whole department. Pattern or practice." The words carried weight. Under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601, the DOJ could investigate entire police departments for systematic civil rights violations, could impose consent decrees, federal monitors, mandatory reforms. One man's complaint had become a potential institutional reckoning. "How did this happen so fast?" Carmen asked. "Federal inquiries usually take months just to acknowledge receipt. This is unprecedented." Neil typed, "I told you I had resources." "Resources that can move the entire Department of Justice in 48 hours? Resources that ensure complaints reach the right desks. Nothing inappropriate, just efficient routing." Carmen was silent for a moment. "Neil, who exactly are you?" "Someone who taught the right people, a long time ago." She didn't press further. Perhaps she understood that some answers created more questions than they resolved. Perhaps she'd learned, in years of civil rights work, that allies came in unexpected forms. "Whatever you did," she said finally, "it's working. The county attorney's office just got served with the federal document request. I'm told there was panic." "Good. Is that all you have to say? Good?" Neil typed slowly. "Panic makes people careless. Careless people make mistakes. Mistakes become evidence. You really have done this before. Many times. In contexts I can't discuss. Then let's make sure this time counts." The panic spread faster than Neil had anticipated. Within 72 hours of the DOJ notification, 3 separate sources confirmed that emergency meetings were convening throughout the Fairfax County power structure. Carmen heard from a contact in the county attorney's office. Pritchard sent a carefully worded text suggesting significant internal discussions, and Walter Keene, who still had connections from his own undisclosed past, reported that Councilwoman Sternwood had canceled all public appearances for the week. The system was scrambling. Neil documented it all. On day 53, the first direct contact came. His doorbell rang at 4:45 p.m. He opened it to find a woman in an expensive suit, mid-50s, silver hair, the polished appearance of someone who'd spent decades navigating corridors of power. "Mr. Odom." She extended her hand. I'm Patricia Whitmore, outside counsel retained by Fairfax County. May I come in? Neil didn't shake the hand, didn't step aside. He typed on his phone. The synthetic voice replied, "My attorney has advised me not to speak with county representatives without her present." Whitmore's smile didn't waver. "This isn't an official meeting, Mr. Odom. I'm simply here to explore whether there might be a path toward resolution that serves everyone's interests." Resolution. A settlement. Compensation for your difficulties. An opportunity to put this matter behind us. Neil typed, "What kind of compensation?" "The county is prepared to offer $75,000, plus a written apology from the department, in exchange for dismissal of all pending complaints and a standard confidentiality agreement." 75,000. More than most victims ever saw, more than most cases ever yielded, and a confidentiality agreement that would bury everything. Neil typed, "No." Whitmore's smile flickered. "Mr. Odom, I understand you've been through a difficult experience, but federal investigations are lengthy, uncertain, and emotionally exhausting. A settlement provides closure, certainty, resources to move forward with your life." "I have resources." "Litigation is expensive. Even with contingency arrangements, the stress of being arrested for being disabled." Neil's typed words cut through her polished presentation. "The stress of being shoved into a police car? The stress of having my head split open while officers laughed?" Whitmore's expression shifted, a momentary crack in the professional facade. "The county deeply regrets any distress you've experienced." "The county doesn't regret anything. The county is afraid of what the DOJ will find." Neil typed with deliberate precision. "I'm not interested in helping you avoid accountability. I'm interested in ensuring this never happens to anyone else. Policy changes can be part of a settlement. Policy changes that are never enforced, training that's never implemented, reforms that exist on paper and nowhere else." He met her eyes directly. "I've seen how institutions protect themselves. I've spent my career studying it, and I know that real change only comes through pressure that can't be bought off." Whitmore studied him for a long moment. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Odom. The county has significant resources to defend itself. Discovery can be invasive. Your entire life will be examined. Let them examine it. There may be things in your past that— my past is classified." The typed words landed like stones. "Literally, by agencies with more authority than Fairfax County will ever possess. So if you're threatening to dig up dirt on me, I suggest you reconsider, because the people who know my actual history are the same people who just convinced the DOJ to prioritize your department's investigation." The silence stretched. Whitmore's smile had vanished entirely now. "I see." She tucked her portfolio under her arm. "The county's offer will remain open for 72 hours. After that, we proceed to litigation." "Proceed." She turned, walked to her car, drove away. Neil closed the door, picked up his phone, called Carmen. "They offered $75,000, he said through the text-to-speech. "I refused." "I expected you would." Carmen's voice held a note of admiration. "What else did they say?" "That discovery would be invasive, that they'd examine my entire life." "Standard intimidation. They're hoping you have something to hide." "I do." Neil typed carefully. "But it's not what they think. And when it comes out, it won't hurt me. It will destroy them." Day 58. The Fairfax County Board of Supervisors scheduled an emergency public session. Officially, the agenda listed discussion of recent concerns regarding police department practices. Unofficially, everyone understood that the federal investigation had forced a reckoning that the county could no longer avoid. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday, 7 p.m., County Government Center. Neil received a formal invitation to address the board. He spent the weekend preparing. Not just his statement, that was simple, factual, the kind of documentation he could produce in his sleep. He prepared for what would come after. The questions, the deflections, the institutional defense mechanisms that would engage the moment he began speaking truth. Carmen arrived at his house on Monday evening to review strategy. "They're going to try to minimize," she said, spreading documents across his kitchen table. "Isolated incident. Officers acted in good faith. Lessons learned. They'll acknowledge just enough to seem reasonable while conceding nothing that matters." Neil typed, "I know the playbook." "Then you know they'll also try to make this about you, your credibility, your motives, whether you're a disgruntled citizen with a grudge or a legitimate victim with a legitimate grievance. Which is why the evidence has to speak for itself. It will. The body cam footage is devastating. Pritchard's willingness to testify is unprecedented, and the DOJ's involvement changes the entire dynamic." Carmen looked at him. "But Neil, there's something I need to tell you." He waited. "I got a call this afternoon from the DOJ attorney assigned to your case, Sarah Chen. She's attending tomorrow's meeting." Neil's eyebrows rose. Not just observing, she's planning to make a statement, something about the scope of the investigation. "Do you know what she's going to say?" No. She was deliberately vague, but the fact that she's coming in person, making a public statement at a local board meeting. Carmen shook her head. "That's not normal procedure. That's a message." To whom? To everyone. The department, the board, the county attorney, everyone who thought they could bury this. She met his eyes. "Whatever you did, Neil, whoever you called, it worked. This isn't just your case anymore. This is a demonstration of what happens when the system picks the wrong target." Neil typed, "That was always the point." "I know." Carmen gathered her papers. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow is going to be long." The stage is set. Tomorrow, 34 years of secrets will collide with small-town corruption in a confrontation no one saw coming. Stay with us, because the showdown that's about to unfold will change everything. Tuesday, 6:45 p.m. The County Government Center's main auditorium was designed for routine business, zoning disputes, budget hearings, the mundane machinery of local governance. Tonight, it was standing room only. Neil arrived with Carmen at 6:30. The crowd parted slightly as they made their way to the front. Not recognition exactly, but awareness. The old black man with the slow speech. The attorney with the reputation for impossible cases. The pair who had somehow summoned federal attention to a county that preferred its problems quiet. The board members were already seated at the elevated dais. 7 supervisors, each representing a different district, each calculating the political implications of whatever they said tonight. Chairwoman Margaret Chen, no relation to the DOJ attorney, gavelled for attention at precisely 7 p.m. This special session of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors will come to order. The room quieted. Tonight's agenda addresses concerns raised regarding recent incidents involving the Fairfax County Police Department. We will hear from the Chief of Police, from affected citizens, and from representatives of relevant oversight bodies. I remind all participants that this is a public session subject to recording and broadcast. She turned to the chief's seat. "Chief McCrae, you may begin." Harlan McCrae rose. 62 years old, 38 years in law enforcement, the last 7 as chief. His face showed the strain of recent weeks, eyes tired, jaw tight, the posture of a man defending a position he knew was compromised. "Thank you, Chairwoman." His voice was measured, careful. "I want to begin by acknowledging that recent events have raised legitimate questions about departmental practices. We take these questions seriously. We're committed to transparency and accountability." Standard opening. Neil had heard variations 100 times. "The incident involving Mr. Cornelius Odom has been the subject of internal review. While our investigation found no evidence of policy violations, we recognize that the perception of impropriety can be as damaging as actual misconduct. To that end, we're implementing several reforms." He read from a prepared statement. Mandatory disability awareness training, enhanced protocols for medical documentation verification, body cam retention policy updates, community liaison program expansion. Words, all words. Neil documented each one, knowing exactly how much they were worth. We deeply regret any distress Mr. Odom experienced during his interactions with our officers. While we maintain that our personnel acted within departmental guidelines, we acknowledge that those guidelines may need revision to better serve our disabled community members. McCrae sat down. Chairwoman Chen looked to the public comment section. Mr. Odom, you've requested time to address the board. You have 15 minutes. Neil rose, walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, placed his phone on the lectern, text-to-speech app ready. The room waited. He typed his first words. The synthetic voice filled the auditorium. My name is Cornelius Odom. I am 68 years old. 3 years ago, I had a stroke that affects my speech but not my mind. I am not drunk. I am not cognitively impaired. I am a citizen of this county who was arrested, assaulted, and humiliated because officers could not be bothered to read a medical card. The silence was absolute. On March 8th of this year, I was pulled over for a malfunctioning taillight. Within 4 minutes, I was face down on the hood of my car. Within 10 minutes, I was in handcuffs. The arresting officer, Sergeant Garrett Fenwick, never acknowledged my medical documentation, never called the physician whose number was on my card, never provided any accommodation for my disability as required by federal law. Neil paused. Let the words settle. The body cam footage from that night, which the county fought for 6 weeks to suppress, shows everything. It shows me complying with every instruction. It shows me attempting to explain my condition. It shows Sergeant Fenwick laughing when my disability is mentioned, and it shows him saying to Officer Daltrey that I needed to be shut down early because I was smart, not drunk. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I have a transcript. Neil held up a document. Timestamp 23 minutes, 14 seconds. Fenwick says, "Old guy's gonna be trouble. You can tell by the way he talks. Not drunk, just smart. Those are the ones you gotta shut down early." Daltrey asks, "What if he complains?" Fenwick responds, "Who's gonna believe him? He can barely string a sentence together." The murmurs became audible gasps. They knew. From the beginning, they knew I wasn't intoxicated. They arrested me anyway. They mocked my disability. They assumed that my impaired speech meant no one would believe my account. Neil let that sink in. 11 days later, the same sergeant and another officer stopped me while I was walking home from my sister's house, 3 blocks from my own front door. They claimed suspicious activity. They performed a search without cause. And when I stumbled, because my right leg is weak from the stroke, I was shoved into the patrol car hard enough to split my head open. He touched his forehead, where a faint scar remained visible. The body cam footage from that second incident was corrupted. Both officers' cameras failed simultaneously. A remarkable coincidence that IT forensics is still investigating. Neil paused again. I filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. 14 pages of documentation, every timestamp, every badge number, every violation of state and federal law. The investigating sergeant, Owen Pritchard, reviewed the evidence and recommended further investigation and possible disciplinary action. He turned to look at McCrae. That recommendation was rejected. Sergeant Pritchard was removed from the case. The investigation was transferred to Lieutenant Victor Crane, the same officer who interrogated me the night of my arrest. And 2 weeks later, I received a letter informing me that all allegations were unfounded or not sustained. Mr. Odom, Chairwoman Chen began. I have 4 minutes remaining, Neil's phone spoke. I intend to use them. She nodded reluctantly. Chief McCrae speaks of reforms, training, protocols. I've heard these words before, from institutions far larger and more powerful than the Fairfax County Police Department, and I've learned that words without accountability are meaningless. Neil turned back to the room. I spent 34 years in federal service. I cannot discuss the specifics. They remain classified. But I can tell you that I dedicated my career to teaching people how to analyze problems, how to document evidence, how to build cases that could survive scrutiny. I taught hundreds of analysts who now serve at the highest levels of the intelligence community. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. The officers who arrested me saw an old black man who couldn't speak properly. They assumed I was drunk or stupid or both. They didn't see my background, my training, my connections. And that assumption, that reflexive dismissal of someone who didn't match their expectations, is exactly the problem. He typed his final words. Because if they did this to me, someone with resources, documentation skills, and access to federal attention, what have they done to people without those advantages? How many complaints have been buried? How many victims have been silenced? How many citizens of this county have been harassed, assaulted, and dismissed because they couldn't fight back the way I can? Neil stepped back from the podium. I'm asking this board to demand real accountability, not words, not training sessions. Accountability with consequences. Because the alternative is a department that believes it can operate above the law, as long as its victims can't speak clearly enough to complain. He returned to his seat. The room erupted. It took Chairwoman Chen 3 full minutes to restore order. When she finally succeeded, her face had taken on a grim determination that suggested the evening's political calculations had shifted significantly. Thank you, Mr. Odom. Her voice was tight. Before we proceed with additional public comment, I'm told we have a representative from the Department of Justice who wishes to address the board. Ms. Sarah Chen? A woman rose from the third row, late 30s, dark suit, the composed bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention in rooms full of powerful people. Thank you, Chairwoman. And for the record, we're not related. A few nervous laughs. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a trial attorney with the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice. I'm here tonight in an official capacity, with authorization from the Assistant Attorney General. The nervous laughter died. 3 weeks ago, our office received a complaint regarding potential civil rights violations by the Fairfax County Police Department. Given the nature of the allegations and the supporting documentation, we initiated a preliminary inquiry under 34 U.S.C. Section 12,601, the pattern or practice statute that authorizes federal investigation of law enforcement agencies engaged in systematic constitutional violations. McCrae's face had gone pale. I want to be clear about what this means and what it doesn't mean. A preliminary inquiry is not a finding of wrongdoing. It's a fact-finding process. We review evidence, interview witnesses, examine policies and practices. Only after that review do we determine whether a full investigation is warranted. She paused. However, based on our initial review of materials in the Odom case, including body cam footage, internal affairs files, and testimony from departmental personnel, we have significant concerns. Concerns not just about this individual incident, but about patterns of behavior that may extend well beyond it. The auditorium had gone completely silent. Accordingly, effective immediately, the Department of Justice is expanding our preliminary inquiry into a full pattern or practice investigation of the Fairfax County Police Department. We will be examining use of force incidents, disability accommodation practices, complaint handling procedures, and evidence preservation protocols over the past 5 years. Councilwoman Sternwood, seated at the far end of the dais, looked like she might be sick. We will be requesting access to all relevant records. We will be conducting interviews with current and former personnel. We will be reviewing complaints that were previously closed or dismissed. And at the conclusion of our investigation, we will issue findings and, if warranted, pursue remedies including consent decrees, federal monitoring, and mandatory reforms. Chen looked directly at Chief McCrae. The Department of Justice does not investigate local police departments lightly. The resources required are substantial, and we have competing demands from across the country. The fact that we are here tonight, making this announcement publicly rather than through standard channels, reflects the seriousness with which we view the evidence already before us. She turned to address the room at large. To the residents of Fairfax County, if you have experienced misconduct by this department, particularly if your complaints were dismissed or ignored, we want to hear from you. Our office will be establishing a dedicated intake line for information related to this investigation. Details will be posted on the DOJ website within 48 hours. She gathered her papers. Thank you for your time. I'll be available for questions from the board after the session concludes. She sat down. The silence held for 3 full seconds. Then the room exploded. The federal government just declared war on a small-town police department. But the battle isn't over, and the enemies are about to fight back with everything they have. Subscribe now, because the next 15 minutes will determine whether justice wins or the system protects its own. The next 2 hours were chaos managed by parliamentary procedure. Board members demanded explanations. McCrae attempted damage control. County Attorney Patricia Whitmore, the same woman who'd offered Neil $75,000 to disappear, made increasingly desperate arguments about federal overreach and local autonomy. None of it changed what had happened. The DOJ investigation was now public. The evidence Neil had compiled was now part of federal record, and the institutional machinery that had tried to bury his complaint was now itself under investigation. At 9:47 p.m., Chairwoman Chen called for a recess. Neil sat in the front row, watching the board members huddle in urgent conversation. Carmen beside him, fielding calls from reporters who'd already begun requesting interviews. "You did it." Her voice was quiet, almost awed. "I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I've never seen anything move this fast." Neil typed, "The evidence did it. I just made sure it reached the right people." "The right people?" She shook her head. "Neil, a CIA director doesn't just make phone calls because someone asks nicely. Whatever history you have with Jerome Stafford, whatever you taught him, whatever you meant to him, it's more than professional courtesy." "It is. Will you ever tell me?" Neil considered. 23 years ago, he typed slowly, I recruited a young analyst who everyone else had written off. He was brilliant but difficult, didn't fit the institutional mold. I saw potential that others missed. Spent 3 years training him personally. When he graduated, I wrote the recommendation that launched his career. Stafford. He's told me many times that without my intervention, he'd have washed out in his first year, been labeled a problem, sent somewhere to be forgotten. Neil paused. Instead, he became the director of the CIA, and he never forgot who believed in him when no one else did. Carmen absorbed this. "So when you called him," "I wasn't asking for a favor. I was asking him to be the person I trained him to be. Someone who uses power for justice, not convenience. Someone who doesn't look away when institutions fail." And he responded. He always responds, because that's who he is. Neil typed his final thought. "I didn't make him director. His abilities did that. But I helped him become someone who would use that position to do what's right. That's the only legacy that matters." The recess ended at 10:15 p.m. Chairwoman Chen reconvened the session with an announcement. In light of tonight's developments, the board has decided to take several immediate actions. First, Chief McCrae has submitted his resignation, effective in 90 days, to allow for an orderly transition of leadership. Gasps from the audience. Second, Sergeant Garrett Fenwick has been placed on unpaid administrative leave pending completion of the federal investigation. Lieutenant Victor Crane has been reassigned to administrative duties and barred from any supervisory role until further notice. More murmurs, but also skepticism. Administrative leave wasn't accountability. It was pause, not punishment. Third, the board is establishing an independent civilian review commission with subpoena power to examine all complaints filed against the department over the past 5 years. This commission will operate separately from internal affairs and will report directly to the board. Fourth, Chen paused. Councilwoman Sternwood has recused herself from all matters related to police oversight, citing potential conflicts of interest arising from her position on the Public Safety Committee. Sternwood sat rigid in her chair, face carefully blank. Finally, the board wishes to issue a formal apology to Mr. Cornelius Odom. Chen turned to face him directly. "Mr. Odom, on behalf of Fairfax County, I apologize. Not just for what happened to you, though that demands apology, but for the system that allowed it to happen. For the complaint process that failed you. For the internal investigation that protected officers instead of seeking truth. You deserved better. Our community deserved better. and while apologies cannot undo harm, we hope they can mark the beginning of genuine change. Neil rose, walked to the podium one more time. The room waited. I accept your apology, his phone spoke. But apologies are easy. Change is hard. I'll be watching, along with the Department of Justice, to see whether tonight's words become tomorrow's actions. Because the test of reform isn't what you announce, it's what you do when no one's watching anymore. He returned to his seat. The session concluded at 11:03 p.m. The aftermath unfolded over weeks. Day 62. Sergeant Owen Pritchard submitted formal testimony to the DOJ investigation, documenting how his recommendations had been suppressed and how he'd been removed from the Odom case. His career was effectively over. Internal affairs officers who broke ranks rarely survived, but he'd made his choice. I became a cop to do the right thing, he told Carmen in a recorded interview. Somewhere along the way, the job became about protecting the institution instead of serving the community. I forgot who I was supposed to be. Mr. Odom's case reminded me. Day 67. FOIA requests filed by local journalists revealed that Fenwick had 7 prior complaints in his personnel file, 5 involving disabled or elderly citizens, all ruled unfounded. The pattern Neil had suspected was now documented in print. Day 74. IT Forensics completed analysis of the corrupted body cam footage from Neil's second encounter. The files hadn't malfunctioned, they'd been manually deleted. The deletion was traced to a terminal in the Evidence Management Office, accessed using Lieutenant Crane's login credentials. Crane was placed on unpaid suspension, pending criminal investigation for evidence tampering. Day 79. The DOJ investigation expanded.
Subpoenas were issued for 5 years of complaint records, use of force reports, and email communications among senior department leadership. Day 83. A heavily redacted email chain between Councilwoman Sternwood and Chief McCrae was released under court order. Neil read the fragments with the analytical eye of someone who'd spent decades extracting meaning from incomplete information. From, to, subject, re-Odom complaint. Handle it before it becomes a, we've dealt with this type before. Make sure understands the implications. This type, the phrase echoed. Neil typed a message to Carmen. They've done this before, probably many times. The question is how many and to whom? Her response. The DOJ is asking the same question.
They're reviewing every disability-related complaint from the past decade. Day 89. The first of what would become many similar cases emerged. A Vietnam veteran with PTSD arrested for erratic behavior that was actually a flashback. A deaf woman ticketed for failure to comply when she couldn't hear the officer's commands. A man with Parkinson's accused of public intoxication because his tremors made him appear unstable. Each case bore the same signature: documented disability, ignored accommodation requests, officers who saw what they expected instead of what was actually there. Neil documented them all. Day 100. The official notice arrived by certified mail. R.E. Federal Investigation of Fairfax County Police Department. Preliminary findings. The envelope contained 47 pages of dense legal language. Neil read every word. The DOJ had found reasonable cause to believe that the department had engaged in a pattern of disability discrimination in violation of ADA Title II, excessive force against vulnerable populations, systematic suppression of complaints through inadequate investigation, evidence tampering and destruction, retaliation against officers who reported misconduct. The findings recommended appointment of a federal monitor for a period of not less than 3 years, mandatory policy reforms, independent oversight of complaint investigations, training protocols developed in consultation with disability rights organizations, and, buried in a footnote that most readers would miss, referral of specific incidents to federal prosecutors for potential criminal charges under 18 U.S.C. paragraph 242. Neil set the document down, picked up his phone, called Carmen. I received the preliminary findings. So did I. Her voice was thick with emotion. Neil, this is everything. Federal monitor, mandatory reforms, criminal referrals. It's a beginning. A beginning? She laughed, half joy, half disbelief. This is the most comprehensive DOJ action against a suburban police department in a decade. You triggered an institutional earthquake. No. Neil's typed response was firm. The department triggered the earthquake when they decided that a man who couldn't speak clearly didn't deserve basic dignity. I just made sure the tremors were recorded. Always the analyst. Always. What happens now? Neil considered. Now we wait. The findings are preliminary. The department will fight. The county will negotiate. The reforms will be watered down, and the monitor's authority will be challenged, and the whole process will take years. That sounds pessimistic. It's realistic. Institutions don't change because one report tells them to. They change because sustained pressure makes the alternative untenable. He typed the next word slowly. But pressure has been applied. The foundation has been laid. And whatever happens next, this department will never be able to claim ignorance again. Is that enough? A long pause. It has to be, because it's all we get, not perfect justice. Not complete transformation, just incremental progress. Small victories that accumulate, precedents that future cases can build on. Neil's final words appeared on his phone screen. I've spent my life in institutions, Carmen. I know how they work. And I know that the only changes that last are the ones that come through proper process, not shortcuts, not favors, documentation and persistence, and the accumulated weight of evidence that can't be denied. You really believe that? I believe that Fenwick will never mock another disabled person without wondering if they're recording him. I believe that the next officer who thinks about deleting body cam footage will remember that the last one is facing federal charges. I believe that somewhere in this county, someone with a disability will be treated with dignity because of what we did here. That's something. It's everything. The synthetic voice carried weight that the artificial tone couldn't diminish. Because that's how change actually happens. Not through heroes who fix everything. Through ordinary people who refuse to be silenced. Day 112. A package arrived at Neil's door. No return address. Plain brown envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper with typed text. Mr. Odom. The emails you requested through FOIA were heavily redacted because they reference ongoing security matters. But redactions can't hide everything. Sternwood and McRae have been coordinating complaint suppression for at least 6 years. There's a pattern. Disability cases, elderly victims, anyone who can't fight back effectively. They call it community management. The evidence is on a secure server maintained by the county IT department. Server address and access credentials enclosed. I can't testify, but I can point you in the right direction. Someone who should have spoken up sooner. Neil read it twice, photographed the document, forwarded everything to Carmen and, through proper channels, to the DOJ investigation team. The anonymous source, whoever they were, had just opened another front. Day 120. Sergeant Garrett Fenwick was arrested at his home at 6:15 a.m. on federal civil rights charges. Neil watched the news coverage from his kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside him. The footage showed Fenwick in handcuffs, led to a waiting sedan by FBI agents. His face was the gray of a man whose world had collapsed. His wife stood on the porch, crying. The charges: willful deprivation of civil rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, evidence tampering, 18 U.S.C. Section 1519, conspiracy to obstruct justice, 18 U.S.C., paragraph 371. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 20 years in federal prison. Neil felt no satisfaction. Just the grim recognition that accountability, when it finally came, looked nothing like the triumphant conclusions of television dramas. It looked like a man in handcuffs and a woman crying, and a system that had protected him for decades, finally forced to acknowledge its own corruption. Later that day, Lieutenant Crane negotiated a plea agreement. Testimony against Fenwick and others in exchange for reduced charges. He would lose his pension, his career, his professional identity. He would not go to prison. The system protecting its own, even in collapse. Neil documented it. Day 135. The settlement conference took place in a sterile conference room at the county administrative building. Carmen sat beside Neil. Across the table, Patricia Whitmore and two junior attorneys. In the corner, a court reporter transcribing every word. "My client is prepared to accept a structured settlement," Carmen said. $350,000 in compensatory damages. A public apology from the county issued through official channels and posted on all county websites, and full cooperation with ongoing DOJ oversight. Whitmore's expression was pained. "The county is prepared to offer $200,000, private apology, and we note that we're already cooperating with federal authorities. $300,000, public apology, and we want a commitment that Mr. Odom's case will be used as a training example for new officers." Whitmore glanced at her colleagues. "We can do $250, public apology, and we'll take the training proposal under advisement." Carmen looked at Neil. He typed, "Take it, but the apology has to be signed by the incoming chief, not the outgoing one, and it has to include a statement acknowledging the specific violations documented in the DOJ findings." Whitmore hesitated. "That's unusual." "So is having your department investigated by the federal government." Carmen's voice was pleasant. "Take it or leave it. We're prepared to go to trial." A long silence. "We'll need to consult with the board. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow." The meeting adjourned. The settlement was finalized 3 weeks later, $275,000. Public apology signed by the incoming chief, an outsider brought in specifically to reform the department, acknowledging systemic failures in disability accommodation, complaint investigation, and evidence preservation. The apology was posted on the county website. Read aloud at a public board meeting. Covered by every local news outlet and several national ones. Neil donated the entire settlement to the Fairfax County Disability Rights Alliance, with instructions that it be used to provide legal assistance to victims of police misconduct who lacked resources to fight back. When Carmen asked why, he typed, "I didn't do this for money. I did it so the next person who can't speak clearly doesn't have to go through what I went through. You could have kept some of it. No one would have blamed you." "I know." He paused. "But I don't need it, and they do. Every dollar that goes to someone who needs help more than I do is a dollar that makes the fight continue after I'm gone." Carmen didn't argue. Day 162. The federal monitor arrived. Her name was Dr. Patricia Huang, former police chief of Portland, Oregon, current professor of criminal justice at Georgetown, nationally recognized expert in police reform. She came with a staff of 12 and a mandate that would last a minimum of 3 years. The department's transformation began. New training protocols, revised complaint procedures, body cam policies with strict chain of custody requirements, disability accommodation guidelines developed in partnership with community organizations. Would it work? Neil didn't know. No one could know until years had passed and the results were measured against reality rather than intention. But the pressure was there now. The oversight, the documentation, the structures that made accountability possible, even if they couldn't guarantee it. That was all any reform could offer. The possibility of change, not the certainty. Day 180. Spring arrived in Northern Virginia. Neil resumed his morning walks at 6 a.m., the same route he'd walked for 15 years. Past the Hendersons' house, around the corner where Walter Keene usually appeared with his aging golden retriever. The surveillance had stopped weeks ago. No more patrol cars drifting past his house at odd hours. No more officers finding reasons to cross his path. The message had been received, but the scars remained. The physical scar on his forehead, fading now but visible in certain lights. The deeper scars, the knowledge that his own community had been willing to destroy him for the crime of seeking accountability. He walked past the spot where Fenwick and Wexler had stopped him, where he'd been shoved into the car, where his blood had stained the pavement. Someone had planted flowers there, small purple blooms pushing through the soil. He didn't know who. Maybe Walter. Maybe a neighbor who'd read the news coverage and wanted to mark the moment in some way. He stood looking at the flowers for a long time, then continued his walk. One evening, Walter appeared on his porch. They sat together as the sun set, the comfortable silence of two men who had shared enough words over the years that more weren't always necessary. "You ever going to tell me what you really did for 34 years? Neil typed, "Probably not." "Fair enough." Walter stretched his legs. "I spent 22 years in places I can't talk about either, doing things that don't show up in any official record. I know the look of someone who's served in ways most people never see." Neil said nothing. "When I heard what they did to you, what Fenwick did, I was angry, but I wasn't surprised. Because I've seen how institutions treat the people who make them uncomfortable, the ones who ask questions, the ones who don't fit the expected mold." Walter turned to look at him. "You taught people how to see through lies, how to find truth in chaos. And then, when you needed that truth most, you used those same skills against a system that wanted you to disappear." Neil typed, "It was the only weapon I had left." "It was enough." Walter nodded slowly. "You changed things, Neil, not everything. Maybe not even most things, but enough things that the next person who goes through what you went through might have a slightly better chance. That's all anyone can do." "I know." Walter rose, stretched. "Oh, 600 tomorrow? Oh, 600? Walter walked away into the gathering dusk. Neil sat alone on his porch, watching the stars emerge one by one above the suburban rooftops. This man couldn't speak clearly, so they assumed he had nothing to say. They were wrong. And now a police department is under federal oversight, officers are facing criminal charges, and a precedent has been set that will protect disabled citizens for years to come. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that fighting back is possible, even when the system is designed to silence you. Day 200. A final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The DOJ's investigation had uncovered more than Neil's case. It had exposed a network of protected misconduct stretching back at least a decade. Complaints systematically buried, evidence routinely destroyed, victims intimidated into silence. But one element remained unexplained. How had the coordination worked? Who had directed the cover-ups? McRae was gone. Fenwick was awaiting trial. Crane had flipped. But the architecture of suppression suggested something more organized than individual bad actors. The answer came through the anonymous source. Another envelope, another sheet of typed paper, another set of server credentials. The emails it revealed were devastating. Councilwoman Pamela Sternwood had been coordinating with police leadership for 6 years. Not just dismissing complaints, but actively directing which ones to suppress. Setting priorities for community management, ensuring that victims who might attract attention were handled differently from those who could be safely ignored. This type. The phrase from the redacted email now made terrible sense. Sternwood had categorized citizens the way military strategists categorized threats. High visibility targets, journalists, lawyers, people with connections, received careful treatment. Low visibility targets, the disabled, the elderly, the poor, the voiceless, could be handled with impunity. Neil had been miscategorized. That was the only reason any of this had happened. If Sternwood had known who he was, who he'd trained, what calls he could make, none of it would have occurred. The system would have functioned perfectly, protecting itself by identifying which targets were too dangerous to engage. The cruelty wasn't in the individual acts, it was in the calculation. The cold assessment that some people's dignity was expendable because they lacked the power to fight back. Neil forwarded everything to the DOJ. 2 weeks later, Pamela Sternwood resigned from the county board. 3 months after that, she was indicted on federal corruption charges. 1 year after the traffic stop, Neil received a phone call from a number he recognized. "Mr. Odom," Jerome Stafford's voice was warm, "I'm calling to tell you that the DOJ has finalized their consent decree with Fairfax County. Mandatory reforms, independent monitoring, everything you wanted." "Not everything." "No," Stafford acknowledged. "Not everything. Some officers will avoid accountability. Some victims will never receive justice. The system will resist change in 1,000 small ways that can't be monitored or controlled. But the foundation is there now. The precedent is set. And the next time a department in this country thinks about targeting someone because they can't speak clearly or walk steadily or fit whatever mold officers expect, they'll remember what happened here. They'll remember that one man with a medical card and a phone call brought federal authority down on an entire institution." Neil typed, "I didn't do it alone." "No one ever does." Stafford paused. "Sir, I want you to know something. When I got your call, when I heard what had happened to you, I was angry. Angrier than I've been in years. Because you're the reason I am who I am. You saw something in me that no one else saw. You invested in me when everyone else wrote me off. And to learn that the country you served, the country we served, had treated you this way." His voice caught. "I made calls that day, Mr. Odom. Calls I probably shouldn't have made. Not illegal calls, but aggressive ones. I made it very clear to the DOJ that this case was a priority, that I was watching, that there would be questions asked at very high levels if it was mishandled. I told you not to. You told me not to intervene inappropriately. You told me to ensure the complaint reached the right people, and I did." Stafford's voice steadied. "But I also made sure those people understood that someone was watching, that this wasn't just another case to be processed and forgotten. And if that's overreach, then I'm guilty." Neil sat with that for a moment. "Thank you, Jerome." "Don't thank me. You taught me that institutions only change when pressure is applied from multiple directions simultaneously. I applied pressure from one direction. You applied it from another. Carmen applied it from a third. Pritchard from a fourth. The journalists, the other victims, the anonymous source, every one of them added weight. And the weight was enough. For this case, for this department, for now." Stafford's voice turned serious. "But you know as well as I do that the fight doesn't end. That reform is always temporary. That institutions constantly push back toward their natural state of self-protection." "I know." "Then keep watching, Mr. Odom. Keep documenting. Keep being the analyst you trained me to be, because the world still needs people who see through lies and find truth in chaos, even if, especially if, they can't always say what they see in the way the world expects to hear it." The call ended. Neil sat alone in his kitchen, surrounded by the artifacts of a year that had changed everything and nothing. The coffee was cold, the morning light was bright through the window, and somewhere in Fairfax County, the first patrol officers were beginning their shifts under new policies and new oversight and new accountability structures that hadn't existed 12 months ago. Small changes, incremental progress. The beginning of what might, if sustained, if protected, if constantly reinforced, become genuine transformation. Or might, if vigilance lapsed, slowly erode back toward the status quo. Neil couldn't know which future would unfold. No one could. All he could do was document, watch, remember, and be ready, if the system slipped again, to make another phone call. Epilogue. 6 months later. Neil walked his morning route at 6 a.m., same as always. The sun was rising over Burke, painting the suburban rooftops in shades of amber. The Hendersons' newspaper had arrived at 5:47, 6 minutes early, consistent with the new delivery driver's pattern. Walter was waiting at the corner of Bellflower and Oak Ridge, golden retriever looking grayer than last year but still enthusiastic about the walk. "Morning, Neil." Neil raised his hand in greeting. They fell into step together. two old men who had seen more than they would ever discuss, walking through a neighborhood that looked peaceful, but had proven itself capable of casual cruelty. At the intersection where the flowers had been planted, someone maintained them now, refreshing them seasonally. Neil paused. Walter stopped beside him. "Still thinking about it?" Neil typed. "Always." "Does it get easier?" A long pause. "It gets different. The anger fades. The sense of betrayal fades. What stays is the awareness. The knowledge that the system I trusted, that I served for 34 years, could turn on me the moment I became inconvenient. That's a hard thing to carry." "Yes." Neil resumed walking. "But it's also useful, because now I see more clearly. I notice things I would have overlooked before. I understand how power actually works, not how it claims to work. And that helps? It helps me help others. Carmen sends me cases sometimes. Disability discrimination, police misconduct, institutional cover-ups. I analyze the evidence, identify patterns, suggest strategies. I can't testify. My speech is too slow for courtrooms. But I can still see, still document, still teach." Walter nodded slowly. "You found a way to keep fighting. I found a way to keep mattering." Neil's typed words carried a weight that the synthetic voice couldn't quite convey. "That's all any of us can do in the end. Find a way to matter, to contribute, to leave things slightly better than we found them." They walked in silence for a while. Then Walter spoke again. "I never told you this, but my brother was disabled. Learning disability, back when they didn't have names for it. Teachers thought he was stupid. Cops thought he was trouble. He spent most of his life being underestimated and overlooked." A pause. "He died 12 years ago. Never got to see anything change." Neil stopped. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Just—" Walter turned to face him. "What you did, Neil, what you built here, it matters. Not just for you, for everyone like you, everyone like my brother, everyone who's ever been dismissed because they didn't fit the mold." Neil didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded, and they continued their walk. 1 week later. Neil sat on his porch in the evening light, watching the neighborhood settle into its nightly rhythms. His phone buzzed. A text from Carmen. "Got a new case. Woman in Arlington, cerebral palsy, arrested during traffic stop when officers interpreted her movements as aggressive." Sound familiar? Neil smiled grimly. He typed his response. "Send me everything." The documents arrived within the hour. Neil read them at his kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside him, analytical mind engaging with the patterns and details and procedural failures that had become his specialty. Another case. Another victim. Another institution choosing convenience over justice. But also another opportunity. Another chance to document, to analyze, to apply pressure through proper channels. Another fight to win. Or lose. Or, most likely, to settle somewhere in between, the messy, partial, unsatisfying progress that was all the real world ever offered. Neil didn't mind. He'd spent his life in the spaces between victory and defeat, had learned that the important thing wasn't winning every battle, but fighting battles that mattered, building cases that could survive scrutiny, creating precedents that future advocates could build on. That was the work. That had always been the work. And as long as he could still see, still think, still document, he would keep doing it. Late that night, as Neil prepared for bed, his phone buzzed one more time. An encrypted message from a number he recognized. "Sir, heard about the new consent decree. Heard about the reforms. Heard you're consulting on disability rights cases now. I always knew you'd find a way to keep fighting. Thank you for teaching me that the truth matters. That documentation survives. That pressure, properly applied, can move even the most resistant institutions. I'm trying to be the person you trained me to be, hoping I make you proud." J. Neil read it twice, typed a brief response. "You always have." Sent it, turned off the light, slept deeply for the first time in months. Because tomorrow there would be more work to do. more cases to analyze, more institutions to hold accountable. But tonight, there was peace. The peace of a man who had been broken and rebuilt, who had been silenced and found new ways to speak, who had been dismissed as worthless and proved that his worth could reshape an entire system. Small victories, incremental progress. The slow, grinding, essential work of making the world slightly less cruel than it wanted to be. That was the legacy. That was enough.